I'm recording this on New Year's Eve 2024, and from here it feels like everyone has retreated into a million incompatible imaginary realities with nothing in common but the sense that things are not going well. But before we explore the present and future, as I intend to spend a lot of time on this channel doing, I'd like to honor Ionis, the two-faced gateway god of the new year, and look backwards to how I came to view the world as one in which astrology and other similar practices undeniably function with incredible potency, if not quite as advertised. In 2002, I was 13 years old, and already a deeply cynical scientific materialist. I was sitting in my freshly painted black bedroom and listening to Toxicity by System of a Down on a burnt CD my best friend had given me. And as I made my first pass through the album, I was struck by how much the righteous indignation of my teen angst was so perfectly articulated. Every word of every song felt like it could have been ripped right from my own personal list of grievances about the society I was becoming aware of around me. Until I got to the 10th track, titled Science. I was right there with them for the first few lines about fighting off the diseased programming of centuries. The early 2000s certainly felt like the malfunctioning product of centuries of religious programming. But then I was totally taken off guard by the next few lines. I'll just read them really quickly here, but go listen to the song. Anyway, they say science fails to recognize the single most potent element of human existence. Letting the reins go to the unfolding is faith. Science has failed our world. Science has failed our Mother Earth. Science fails to recognize the single most potent element of human existence. And then they repeat over and over that spirit moves through all things. I was stunned. How could we agree on so much about modern civilization? How could we see the same problems with the world and come to such different conclusions about what was missing? This was the height of the war on terror. It was incredibly hard for me to imagine that what the world needed was more faith. Being 13, I didn't fixate on it too much and went back to headbanging and drawing skulls on my composition notebook or whatever it was I was doing at the time. But fast forward to 2008. I was 19 and the economy was crumbling. I'd been extremely sick with a laundry list of mysterious symptoms for the past 2 years. I'd had every test performed that contemporary medicine had to offer, but nothing seemed out of place, aside from some minor irritation at the end of my colon from shitting my brains out during colonoscopy prep. In desperation for answers, my mom was able to talk me into going to a shaman that her friend had recommended for this type of situation. I was extremely skeptical, and mostly doing it for her. But, to my surprise, after what basically seemed like an hour of him waving his hands over me and muttering under his breath, I did feel a little different. I saw him once a week for a few months, and by 2009, I was feeling much better and had totally dove headfirst out of my scientific materialist paradigm and had come to totally agree with System of a Down that science had failed to recognize the single most potent element of human existence, spirit, which moves through all things. Looking back on the whole scenario, my symptoms were probably psychosomatic, generated by the stress of embarking on the responsibility of adulthood, especially while the world crumbled around me, and within a worldview that didn't allow any of it to mean anything. And that's why I felt better after some white guy claiming to practice indigenous Amazonian medicine swirled around me while I meditated. It may have been, on some level, probably, kind of a scam. But it opened a hatch in my stiflingly limited view of life that allowed for an encounter with a trans-rational state, and in a perfectly trans-rational way, scam or not, it did solve the problem that modern medicine couldn't. I was making myself sick with the stress of engaging solely with the meaningless, disenchanted, and rational aspects of existence. The problem was, it felt like such a relief to engage with the other end of the spirit versus matter spectrum that I committed with equal zealotry in that direction, becoming completely unmoored from reality. And as is often the case in extreme polarities, I went so far in the other direction that I came full circle back to where I had started, adrift in a void of total meaninglessness. Without the framework of rationality and logic and empirical reasoning acting as the scaffolding of my worldview, everything was equally possible, so no specific perspective seemed particularly likely. The solution had turned into another problem, and once again I found myself in a tremendously stressful state of being. It was around the same time period that the Flat Earth movement was really catching on, and for some reason, despite my pathological open-mindedness to anything that wasn't accepted by, in quotes, the establishment, I knew in the very core of my being that this was one of the stupidest ideas I had ever heard. But I saw myself in them, and it was a huge reality check. I had thrown the discernment baby out with the nihilistic dogma bathwater of my materialist worldview, and from the soil onto which I had dumped that baby-filled bathwater had grown a weed-choked garden of esoteric concepts in desperate need of pruning. So that's what I've been doing ever since. I bring all of this up because I see a lot of the wild pendulum swinging of ideology that played out on a personal level for me now playing out in the collective, certainly in the US at least. Our culture seems like it's really starting to viscerally feel the wrongness of living in a paradigm where we spend our fleeting moments on a tiny ball, spinning aimlessly through a void with nothing to look forward to but crushing loneliness, seeing butt cheeks in higher resolution when the next phone comes out, and then sinking back into oblivion for all of eternity. I enjoy butt cheeks as much as the next, but in our desperation for more, we're reaching for literally anything else, retreating into warring realities tailor-made to be misleading and all-absorbing by predatory algorithms and demagogues. So, on this channel, I think what I'd like to do is basically just publicly what I've been doing in private. That is, approaching all things occult, oracular, spiritual, and otherwise esoteric with a critical eye, in hopes of finding the middle ground, where our perspective can be fantastical without being pure fantasy, and ordered without being oppressive. I look back now and see the spirit versus matter battle for supremacy as a false polarity. After all, how do we even know spirit flows through all things unless some of those things are bleeding, shitting, scarred human bodies that spirit can view itself through? They're two sides of the same coin. They need each other. I suspect it's the shortcomings of our philosophies, religions, and sciences that separate the two, rather than their intrinsic nature. And there are plenty of traditions that assert the same suspicion. So, I hope you will join me in exploring all of that, or at least as much as I can before I get tired of making YouTube videos, or die. Whichever comes first, I suppose. Until next time, thanks for listening.